Good morning, everyone. So today's webinar is being brought to you by the Forestry Development Center, UP Los Baños, in cooperation with the UPLB Information Technology Center, which is hosting us via Zoom. So I'd like to welcome everyone joining us from the Zoom room and also our official Facebook page of FDC. So far we have 216 participants and 52 joining us from Facebook. So we are here once again to present to you the last of the series of webinars being given by FDC, coincidentally entitled Turning the Tide, Why Mangroves Matter. This is part of FDC's ETalks series of webinars for 2022. So in behalf of FDC, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to everyone who took time off to attend today's webinar. So my name is Raymand Vincent Cabrera, and I will be your host for today. So it feels a long time has passed since we started the year with this ETalk series about mangroves. And yet here we are, attending and participating in today's webinar, which will be the last of the series. We are very hopeful that everyone has benefited and learned more about the importance of mangroves, especially towards protecting the environment. So I'm very excited for today since we'll be having two powerhouse resource speakers who I will be introducing later on. So, but first, I would like to give a glimpse of the program proper for today. Kindly share the slide. Okay. So before we start, I would like to invite everyone to please stand up and offer a moment of silence for a short prayer, which will be immediately followed by the singing of the Philippine national anthem.
Dear God, thank you for allowing us today to meet and share our knowledge and time with one another in this webinar. We are truly grateful for all the blessings you have bestowed upon us. May you extend your divine wisdom to our speaker so that he would be able to impart effectively his God-given knowledge to Dear God, thank you for allowing us today to meet and share our knowledge and time with one another in this webinar. We are truly grateful for all the blessings you have bestowed upon us. May you extend your divine wisdom to our speaker so that he would be able to impart effectively his God-given knowledge to all of us. Bless the participants as well so that they would be able to glean the vital information from this activity and spread what we've learned in the spirit of your love and generosity. May we realize that this activity should glorify your name. Amen.
Sing
Okay, so before anything else, some house rules for today's webinar. So if you wish to speak, you may click the raise hand button. This is for later on sa open forum, and only unmute your microphone if you're given the signal to speak. Questions may be asked via the Q&A tab, which is in Zoom, or via the comment section in Facebook Live. So kindly indicate your unit, organization before asking the question. The whole webinar is being recorded for documentation purposes. And the video is also live on Facebook via the Forestry Development Center, CFNR UPLB official Facebook page. After the webinar, you will be redirected to the post-evaluation Google form so we may collect your assessment. E-certificates will be distributed after. So to formally start this webinar and to give her opening remarks, I would like to call on the current Associate Dean of the College of Forestry and Natural Resources, none other than Professor Analyn Codilan. Ma'am Ana, stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Raymond. Good morning to all our participants. So on behalf of our Dean Marlo D. Mendoza, we would like to welcome you all to the Forest Policy ETalks webinar. This webinar is being organized by the Forestry Development Center of our college, the UPLB College of Forestry and Natural Resources. This webinar is also the fourth in the series of webinars on Turning the Tides, Why Mangroves Matter. Today's webinar will be another day full of information about mangrove as our resource speakers will tackle science-based mangrove management. Mangroves are among the most important component of the coastal ecosystem. This ecosystem is predominantly intertidal habitats that could be found worldwide, especially in the tropics like the Philippines and subtropics along shallow water coastlines. We also know that mangroves contribute a wide range of ecosystem services. Although this area is of low floral diversity, it is highly productive and shelters diverse animals, algae, and microbes. Mangroves serve as a habitat of aquatic and terrestrial wildlife, which are also important sources of food or medicine. These coastal forests also protect shoreline communities from storm surge, tsunamis, and wind, trap sediments and stabilizes coastal areas, supports food chain. It's also a nursery for marine fishes, provides ecotourism, recreation, building materials, natural laboratory for students, aquaculture, and carbon sink. So napakahaba po ng listahan of what we can get from our mangrove ecosystems. Commercially important fishes and crustaceans are tied to this fragile ecosystem. Some of the materials from biogeochemical activities in the mangroves also support ocean productivity. Our country is truly blessed as it is a nature trove for 70% of the world's plant species. For our mangroves alone, the Philippines is highly diverse, having 35 true mangrove species, which is about 64.8% of the globe's total. Among areas of the country, Mindanao has the biggest mangrove area of approximately 29% of the country's total. But when it comes to old-growth mangrove forests, it is Palawan who tops the list for having around 5,317 hectares. The notion that mangroves and other wetland areas are wastelands was probably one of the main reasons why, until today, we are experiencing a worldwide and also a countrywide decline in our mangrove forests. Moreover, the conversion of large span of mangrove for aquaculture, timber harvest, salt ponds, and settlement has contributed largely to its loss. And based on the Natural Forest Resource Assessment conducted by DENR between 2003 to 2005, there are only 249,000 hectares of mangrove forests remaining in the country. The ability of mangrove forests to act as a natural wall to reduce the impact of storm surge has been proven from the past super typhoons that hit our country and from the tsunamis created by strong earthquakes along the Indian Ocean. These events have raised the attention on the conservation and rehabilitation of mangrove areas. Additionally, the demand for fuel for cooking and other uses, poles, and the valuable ecosystem services that this forest could provide increased the call for planting mangroves. However, the planting efforts were accordingly futile as it lacked the science-based management approach. That's why we're all here today to hear about it and to give us a very good discussion on that. Today we have Dr. Severino G. Salmo III, an associate professor from UP de Laman. And we also have our dear Dr. Jurgenne Primavera, an academician of National Academy of Science and Technology and one of the, the bigwigs in terms of when it comes to mangrove. So we have these two as our speakers for today. This webinar intends to discuss the roadmap for mangrove resources and the current issues, challenges that the country is facing in the restoration and conservation of mangroves. This webinar hopes to highlight the challenges, plans, and strategies to ensure that our mangrove ecosystem's health and functions because our lives are connected to this neglected ecosystem. Sabi nga natin, everything is related to everything. And that this treasure, we must pass it on to our future generations. So thank you very much. Welcome again. And I hope that you would learn a lot from this webinar. Congratulations in advance to FDC.
Thank you very much, Dr. Codilan, for that very warm welcome, while also emphasizing the importance of mangroves and also dishing out relevant facts about our mangrove. So before we start, first, an icebreaker. So what do you have to do? All you have to do is open your web browser. So any web browser will do, from your phone, from your laptop, from your iPad. Go to www.menti.com and input or scan the QR code. So, ayan, sinishare na po ng ating text team, yung Menti code natin. So, 76251165. Again, open your browser, go to www.menti.com, and then just input this code. 76251165, or alternatively, you can scan the QR code here. So it will redirect you directly to the website, menti.com. So can we start the Menti? Ayan, so the first question is, where are you from? So which region, province, or country? So looks like marami pong nanggaling sa, marami ang nagsasabi na nasa Calabarzon sila. Ayan, Los Baños region. We have participants coming from Metro Manila, Northern Samar, Iloilo. Looks like the whole of the Philippines. So hinahanap ko din kung meron ba tayong participant coming from another country. Ayan, dami na. So I think well represented ang mga provinces natin sa Philippines. So Davao City, we have someone from Capiz, Butuan, Zamboanga, Negros Oriental. Where else? Lanao del Norte, Camarines Norte, Northern Samar. Yan. So nadadagdagan pa. Do we have a second question for this? Ayan. So the second question is, what word best describes what you do? So meron tayong choices. Okay, from our participants. So are you in the teaching profession? Do you work in an NGO? Do you work in a private institution? Do you work for the government? Or are you a student? So currently, marami po ang kasama natin working sa government. So yan. Typically po, ang mga kasama talaga natin dito is coming from government agencies, LGUs. Ayan, mga line agencies po natin. And then, it's followed by students. Ayan. So, majority of our participants are either from the government or students. So, nakakagalak po na yung mga estudyante natin is they're very willing to learn, know more about our mangroves. Okay, thank you everyone for participating for that very short icebreaker. So before I go on introducing our two resource speakers, let me introduce first the one who will be serving as a moderator for the open forum later on. She is none other than my colleague at the center, Forester Judith Castillo. So our first speaker is a multi-awarded, internationally recognized mangrove scientist and is currently the Chief Mangrove Scientific Advisor of the Zoological Society of London. She graduated cum laude from UP Diliman with a degree of BS Zoology. She finished her MA in Zoology from Indiana University and her PhD in Marine Science from UP Diliman. She has more than 100 scientific papers, reviews, manuals, books, and other publications to her name. She was the lead author of the Citizen's Manual on Mangrove Rehabilitation, Pond Mangrove Reversions, and Beach Forest Propagations. She served as a board member and scientific advisor of various organizations and has received numerous awards and recognitions, including one of the 30 Prime Magazine Heroes for the Environment and the 50 DOST Men and Women of Science in 2005. She was named Scientist Emeritus of CFDEC AQD in 2007, while also being given the Distinguished UP Alumni UP Award in Environmental Conservation and Sustainable Development in 2009. A member of the Philippine National Academy of Science and Technology and a fellow in Marine Conservation. Today, she will talk about the issues and challenges in mangrove rehabilitation and conservation in the Philippines. She's none other than our first speaker for today, Dr. Jurgenne H. Primavera. Our second speaker is an associate professor at the Institute of Biology, University of the Philippines, Diliman. His expertise is on mangrove ecology and restoration ecology. His advocacy lies on adaptive mangrove conservation and restoration and integrated coastal management. He obtained his PhD in biological science in the University of Queensland, Brisbane, Australia, and did his postdoc in metagenomics in the University of Ryukyus in Okinawa, Japan. He is a prolific writer, having published his researches in both local and international scientific journals, and also a multi-awarded scientist, including winning the 2015 NAST Environmental Science Award and Outstanding Scientific Publication Award in Biological Sciences. Today, he will talk about the draft Philippine Mangrove Roadmap of 2020 to 2030, implications on mangrove conservation and restoration. He is none other than Dr. Severino G. Salmo III. So to start out, let me call on Dr. Jurgenne Primavera to start with her talk. Dr. Primavera, the stage is yours.
Thank you for that introduction. Is my voice okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, sige. Stated I'll talk about issues and challenges of rehab and conservation in the country today. And I will do this by looking at a number of case studies of my NGO. First, I started out at CFTech Aquaculture Department, and to the left, that's the research building. I did research on shrimps and prawns, and to the right is the training building, which I headed for about 4 years in training. But actually, my first 2 years, were with the brackish water station in Leganes, as you can see here. We first had a nipa hut, and then eventually the fish ponds were developed very nicely. Then I retired in 2007, and the next year I joined an NGO, the ZSL, and What do you know? But that I went back to those mangrove areas, because here to the right, these were mangroves cleared for the fish ponds, and then they, after 20 years, no, they regenerated. And I'd like to thank Seb. I think he's in the group in the photo below, who, not Seb, I'm sorry, Dixon of UPLB, who invited me to this webinar. So mangroves are trees and shrubs, and these are Singapore mangroves, but similar. We have similar species. And as mentioned, we have about 35 to 40 of these. Just in red boxes are the most common, api-api, bakaw, and pagat, but we will see more of these later. But also mentioned have been the goods and services of mangroves, especially for climate change adaptation and mitigation. That's coastal protection and carbon capture. And here is old paper showing the valuation of mangroves to be a total of about $14,000 to $16,000 per hectare. So it's really a lot of money if you look at all the goods and services of mangroves. Let's focus on coastal protection. No? To the left, we see typhoons, hurricanes, cyclones. They're all the same. They are storms. And 30% of them are found here in our country. So we can see every storm, we have thousands of dead people. And the figure on the right shows the severity, how strong the storms are. And again, we have the strongest storms in red. And we saw this with Haiyan, no? And this figure, I made this to illustrate what a storm surge is, that it is composed of the tide, the surge on top of the tide, and the wave. So altogether, this example shows about 6 meters altogether. Graphically, be like this, no? The storm surge that we see. And the reason I made this nice graph was to explain what a storm surge is to grades 4 and 5 school children and 6 in Quezon City the year after Yolanda. So this is what we have to explain to our children. We have to teach them, because we have 36,300 km of coastline, and these are the events, the coastal events, and this is what our students should learn, no, from grade school. So what are the tides, waves, then the surge and the tsunami. So I'll focus on the surge and the tsunami, except for the wave height, which overlaps about 2 to 12 meters for the storm surge and 2 to 40 for the tsunami. They differ. The wavelength, the tsunami is almost 100 times the length of the surge, and also in the physical mechanism. Whereas the surge is in the air, it's atmospheric pressure. The tsunami emanates from the earth, earthquakes. So this has to be clarified, because at the height of Yolanda, our broadcaster was saying, oh, the tsunami and the storm surge, you know, they're coming. There was no differentiation at all. So even our media people need some education. And here we see to the left, the damage of these storms, the highest being Yolanda with more than $2 billion, and the deaths. We thought Yolanda had 6, actually 15,000, but even before we had a 20,000 death storm. And so these storms are deadly. They are deadly. No, it's a problem. People die. So what is the solution to the problem? And science gives us a 2012 paper from Ivor et al., which says that the energy of waves, which causes the damage, can be reduced, absorbed, attenuated by physical factors, but also by biological factors, meaning the trees, their density, their height, and so on. And if we want to reduce the energy by up to 60%, we need a green belt of 100 meters wide. If we want to reduce it, almost all of it, 10%, then it's 1/2 km. But anyway, let's go for 100 meters. And this shows that a wave running through a vegetation of almost 100 meters, got reduced from 6 to 7 meters down to only 1.5 meters when it reached the house. So what do we have in the country? We have green belts of what? Coconut trees and nipa huts. And we can see that coconut trees are not at all effective, in absorbing wave energy. Despite all this legislation requiring, all these mangrove strips of 20 meters, 100 meters, this is what we see, non-compliance of our green belt regulations. We had a project, ZSL in Capiz, and we had these squares, plantations. From the side, they look like this, so that by now they have formed a green belt. So in another webinar, I was told to talk in the national language. So sabi ko, belt, sinturon, green, luntian, green belt, sinturong luntian, or pangkaligtasan, the safety belt. And a coastal green belt would be luntiang sinturon sa baybayin or sa tabing dagat or sinturon na pangkaligtasan. So sabi ko, green belt na lang. No? It's much simpler, coastal green belt, so that this will be introduced to public discourse and we will understand it very easily. So these are examples of green belts near fish ponds. Pwede pala. Ito naman sa Cebu, next to housing. So pwede yung green belt. And so if we remember the 100 meters from the paper that we need, in 2014, after Yolanda, Senator Bam Aquino filed a bill requiring 100 meters of coastal green belts in coastal municipalities, followed the next year by a House bill sponsored by Representative Patocabe, who unfortunately was assassinated, and Senator Aquino lost the election. So, and we have versions of this green belt bill, but still it has to pass, and yet it's really the most urgent bill that we need. So I think we should forget the national government, the legislation, the Congress, and focus on local governments with this Mandanas ruling that gives local governments a 40% increase in funds, up to 1 trillion pesos this year. So with those funds, mayors and governors can already put up green belts and other environmental mechanisms that are needed. For example, in Cagayan de Oro, the mayor was able to build houses for send-home victims, 10,000 units, because they already had land. They had bought land with LGU funds. Wala pang mandanas, no? Just their own funds. And earlier this year, the mayor of Alcala, Cagayan, was buying native trees from all over the country, including Mindanao. And so they said, why not put up our own greenhouse, a nursery, which they did. I don't know how much it costs, maybe 100,000 pesos, maybe $500,000. But this is, local governance. And with the Mandanas funds, they will be able to all the more do it. So we need green belts, but experience has shown that mostly in the Philippines, we have maybe 20 to 50 meter green belt of mangroves. And if we say we need 100 meters, how do we provide the balance of 20 to 50 meters? And the answer is the beach forest. Here, we see in Palawan, where the coastline has a steep slope. It's only the beach forest. Where the slope is gentle, you have the mangroves in front and the beach forest at the back. So the green belt comprises the intertidal mangroves and or the supratidal beach forest. And these beach forest species are many of those that the Alcala Cagayan nursery is now propagating. We do have the science. We have the books that identify the species, and also this one manual on nursery and outplanting. And of the 156 species that we have monitored so far, half of them are trees that can be planted. So from there, let's jump to Yolanda, strongest storm to make landfall on the planet, so that the government announced that it would spend 1 billion pesos to replant mangroves and beach forests. So a group of us from the NGO community and academe ask the question, do we need to plant $1 billion of mangroves, 1 billion pesos? And so we went to Samar and Leyte. The Leyte group included Salmo, who is the speaker after me. And we surveyed 7 places. And basically, our conclusion was that it was the Bacau, what you see here below, that had the damage mostly. And we also published this in a scientific paper. These are natural mangroves to the right. Here we have natural mangroves, which you would think are dead. But after 1 month, you can see this pagatpat was after all surviving. So our conclusion and recommendation was no need to replant in most areas. And we should use the 1 billion pesos wisely. And we shared our recommendations in 3 national fora, 2 in Leyte and 1 in UP Diliman, to protect natural mangroves, etc. But when the funds were released, it was business as usual. We have here mostly 60% went to wildings of Bacau, the species that got most damaged. So let's look at this artwork, which shows, again, the goods and services of a mangrove: shelter, food, medicines. So what is the value of these goods and services? And a paper that we had published in 2008 in Science looked at all these uses and services of mangroves, including aquaculture, shrimp farming, and looked at the value in terms of millions of US dollars, depending on the area of mangroves, up to 1,000 hectares here below, and found that if a maximum of 8 out of 10 square kilometers, or 800 hectares, would be developed into shrimp farming, and would be preserved, would be protected, and only 20% developed, so you still have profits from shrimp farming, then you have the maximum value of the mangrove. Meaning to say, the maximum value is $16 million at 80% mangroves conserved, 80 to 20 or 4 to 1 ratio. And that ratio we are now trying to introduce to the country for the conservation of mangroves. So that here in 1940, we had mostly mangroves and just a few ponds. By now, as early as 1994, it is at parity, tabla, 1 to 1. Whereas ideally, we should have more mangroves, 4 to 1. So the conclusion is we need to rehabilitate mangroves. 3 strategies are seafront, planting seagrass, and abandoned ponds. First, seagrass. The classic way in CAMSUR 2012, 1,000 volunteers, 7,000 volunteers, 1 million propagules. But if you see here, the natural species Avicennia marina, whereas they were planting Rhizophora, these propagules, wrong species. And understandably, my friend Dominic did quadrats after 4 years and found less than 2% survival. Sayang, no? Because wrong species. Bakit ba itong Bacau is favored? Because they are big, whereas Avicennia marina or Piapi is small, you need a nursery. More so with pagatpat. They are small as guava seeds. So the planting is by convenience, not by ecology. And really the driver is the Guinness record. There is no science. No? We see all of this. Kulang sa science. Kasi if we look at the popular, the common species, Bacau with the prop roots, pagatpat with the pneumatophores, and Piapi with pneumatophores, which are pencil-like roots. And if you look at the ecology, Bacau is found at the back. Here, you can see the prop roots of pagatpat and Piapi. They are not frontliners, but all our programs are planting them in the front. So here's pagatpat, germinated, and then grown into a forest. And this paper is by Buduan and Balion, one of your past speakers, the RM awardee. This one, it was available as early as 2012. No, why it is not being used by the planters, I do not know. So anyway, in a town in Iloilo, the mayor planted pagatpat. This is Dumangas, 2009, and this is what they are now. This is the first case study, the correct species along the seafront. So here we have 2007 to 2009, and many groups have planted there. This was really a free wedding of the mayor to celebrate his birthday, on condition that the couples would first plant mangroves. So now this has moved into local governance. Tree planting is required for weddings, baptisms, and funerals. And also, this site has been featured on BBC, both a video and a news on phantom forests. So the labor that we use, for planting is volunteer. But first, especially the young people, they have Facebook. They take pictures for Facebook, which is a good driver. But for us, the labor is a paradigm shift, because usually the fisher folk plant, they are paid and tapos na ang business transaction. Never mind if the mangroves die, so they plant again and they are paid again. So financially it is sustainable for them. That is what economists call perverse incentives. Kami naman, we don't pay. Instead, the labor, free labor of the fisher folk is their contribution that gives them ownership to the mangroves and obligates them to care for the mangroves to maturity. So it's really a huge paradigm shift. Okay, this is still in Dumangas, 2005. I had another fisher folk group. We planted the right species, Avicennia marina, very healthy after 3 weeks, very dead after 3 months, because we had planted in the wrong site. At low tide looks very nice, at high tide very flooded. We had planted right here, below mean sea level. So correct species, but wrong site. And if you look at the location of mangroves, they are intertidal between low and high tide, but mainly middle to upper intertidal. So if you plant, you should focus on the upper to middle intertidal. This is the technology below, and that is the science above. Definition of mangroves is that they are mostly 70% of the time above mean sea level, immersed. But here you look at this photo ops of Miss Earth, hindi pa tapos, na submerged na ang mangroves. Even here in Zamboanga and so many planting projects, because ang hinahabol is the tree planting record and the Guinness, and so it's not ecology guided, it's not science guided. Okay, let's go now to number 2, case study in Ahuy. The problem of coastal erosion. When mangroves are cut, they die, their roots die. But not only that, the soil that is trapped in the roots disappear, and that is the cause of coastal erosion. As you can see, you go all over the country. Grabe ang coastal erosion. So in our site in Ahuy, Iloilo, it was very serious erosion. Here you can see from the roots, almost 1 meter, And this one to the left is already the solution. But anyway, let's look at the gray engineering, mostly cemento. And cemento will not give, when there's a wave, it will crack. It's not like mangroves that are resilient. So this is green-gray engineering. And in this site, we commissioned a consulting firm to design breakwaters based on NAMRIA records, and also they did measurements of waves and winds for 1 week. And this was constructed in 2010, the breakwaters. This shows just in 2 years, you see the erosion, and in 2 years, you see no more erosion, the same site. But we also did the science. There were measurements, regular measurements of elevation, because the main objective of the breakwater was to increase the elevation because it was too low, and secondly, to protect the mangroves. So here we see, this is the planted mangroves protected by the breakwater, the natural mangroves to the left, and the measurements of elevation. At the start, 2009, you see here, and I think in 2016, 50 cm increase in elevation, and these were published results in journals, scientific journals. And this one is the combination of science and the community, because this was all community-based. The green-gray engineering, with the dynamic leadership of the PO leader who passed away 2 years ago, unfortunately. And it shows his leadership. This was the original nipa hut they had for their office. And with our GIZ project last year, we named the new building of the PO in his honor, Elmer Babiera. And this is now the site, a drone shot. 2011, you can see the breakwaters just starting. 2019, and you can see the thick mangroves now protected. We have not completed yet the other side. And on the ground, you can see 100 meters from the beach to the breakwater in compliance with the green belt requirement. And for LGUs, we have this very rich source material, coastal erosion management by MSI. I think this is 3-4 years old. All LGUs, coastal, should have this copy of this. Okay, another problem is seagrass planting, because this is where all the millions of pesos of mangrove funds go. Planting on seagrasses, you can see it's all over. This is Bohol in 2015. Very clear, no? You can see the seagrasses and you can see the bacao, squares of bacao plantations. But this goes back to the 1960s actually. So this was private practice. The government, when it had money, nangopya ng private practices, whether may science or not, imbes na government would do the research, ano ba dapat? Nangopya, and that's why we have all these bacao on seagrass beds. And if you look at the hectareage of the Philippines, consistently it has been going down up to 2000. And all of a sudden, it jumped, it almost doubled. And we were surprised, where were all these new mangroves? And we found that here, these green bars represent all the projects, multi-million-dollar mangrove projects that would account for the most part on the new hectareage of mangroves in the Philippines. So my NGO ZSL came up with no planting on seagrass beds, because what will happen to the dugongs, the sea turtles, the seahorses, all these invertebrates that depend on the seagrasses. And this was on Facebook, never again. And really, this planting on seagrasses is not rehabilitation, it is transformation of ecosystems from seagrass to mangroves. And it is a no-no, at least for us scientists. So lastly, we come to pond reversion. Here we have seafront planting, seagrass planting. They are all open access, walang problema. So they are very popular, especially seafront because of the photo ops. But if you look at it, dapat pond reversion, because this is where mangroves used to be, no? They were cleared, made into ponds. So reverting them back to mangroves would be the easiest. Mataas ang survival rate. But socio-politically, very contentious. You can get killed, you can get shot. Yun lang ang problema. So it needs really local governance. And here's our example in Leganes, Iloilo. 2009, it was an abandoned pond. By 2012, it was full cover with assisted regeneration. Satellite image shots. 2009, we started, GSL started here. And 2014 was the establishment of an eco park. So this is our case study number 3, pond reversion. And here we see plantings. More than 100 groups have planted there. And this was the original info center in 2014, when the mayor, then Mayor Haen, was so enthused that he said, we will establish an eco park. Never mind, it's only 9 hectares. He was so inspired. And how many years now down the road, the nipa hut and bamboo has been replaced with concrete, and GI sheets with donations. And this was inaugurated by local officials with the mayor, who is the grandson of the late mayor, actually, now the present mayor, and also with the UK ambassador, her first trip out of town. So we have so many laws again on reversion of abandoned ponds, but it's more in the non-compliance. And if you look at this December 2020 record from BIFAR, it shows the total pond hectareage of existing expired and so on, we have 60,000 hectares. But the existing, meaning they have complete records, they pay the fees, it's only 26%. Most of them are expired, meaning they do not pay the fees, they have not made the reports, and they should really be canceled. The FLA should be canceled, but only 10% have been canceled. So again, it is political will that needs for these laws to be enforced. So just a few shots of that place. 86,000 mangrove seedlings have been bagged, no, by, again, free labor here, including, of course, not young children. We do not allow, but his family really made a special request. So we said, pwede basta may supervision. And here, high school, many high school students, thousands of them. So they own that place, that eco park. It's a win-win-win socio-political strategy of academe, NGO, LGU, the community. And this was the outplanting, since many of you are foresters, you know this term, of the 86,000 bag, 83,000 were outplanted, 2009 to 2015, again by free labor. So this is now what it is. Unfortunately, a dead dugong was found kasi may seagrasses nearby na protected. And so again, GSL made a poster, save our seagrass beds, save the dugong, for information, because we think whoever killed this one, did not know that it was, a meek and mild animal, thought that it was dangerous, and so they did something. And this is now, to the left, is where we planted, called assisted natural regeneration. We use the local seedlings. So only 3 years, complete mangrove cover, whereas to the right, if we depend on nature, just natural regeneration, it will take 20 years, no? So walang coastal protection for 20 years. This is what I saw in another part of Iloilo. Took 15 years for this pond to get natural cover without any assistance. Okay, the last few slides. This is what, kasi it was mentioned na magkaka-policy, no? You have a mangrove and you have a pond. In the mangrove, you have gleaners, capture fisheries, okay? In the pond, you have bangus, tilapia, only a few species. So if we compare, mangroves have fisheries products, but also other services, totaling up to $20 million pesos, and many sectors that benefit. Whereas if you keep it as a shrimp pond or a fish pond, it has food security, but only for a few species. Maybe the value will be as much, but the sectors benefited will be not too many, okay? And so we know, no? If you go around in mangroves, you have these coastal dwellers. So with mangroves, we have social equity, which we do not find with fish ponds. And this one I'd like to focus. If you have a mangrove, you have residents, like the shellfish, the mudskippers, that are used by these coastal dwellers for their food, no? Food security. Here's your mangrove. When they go out, still more fish that are caught by offshore fishermen. Now this one, you see, it's a very nice fishing boat, but that's in Palau. That's not in the Philippines, because our fisher folk in the Philippines are very poor because we have no more fish. Now, this is only possible because of the free flow of the tide, in and out, in and out. But when you put a dike here, you stop the free flow, okay? So that is why you have food in both instances, but it's very different, no? The sectors that are served and so on, when you have ponds and you have mangroves, because this is a major argument of Bureau of Fisheries for not reverting abandoned ponds to mangroves, kasi daw ma-threaten ang food security. I think if you are an ecologist, you follow science, you will know that this is not really valid. So last topic na, blue carbon, we have mangroves, and the Philippines is number 15, no, in terms of blue mangroves in this paper. And if you compare mangroves, it is the mangroves in the Indo-Pacific that have the highest carbon. This is amount of carbon here. This one I did not want to include, but anyway, here you have a mangrove in Ecuador converted into a fish pond. Just to show you, the amount of carbon found in this mangrove is about 800, whatever. And here, when it was converted into fish pond, only 300. So the title says, the carbon footprint of shrimp ponds is really huge because they produce a lot of carbon. So the last study that I will cite by our PhD, who is now actually of GSL, on carbon storage in natural sites, in eco parks. And she found that the highest was 350 megagrams per hectare here in an eco park, a natural site. She also looked at plantations of mangroves, both in the seafront and the fish pond. And she found, she's clear, in the seafront, not too high, but in the fish pond, 650 megagrams carbon per hectare, even almost double in the natural sites. And this is still another important reason why we should really revert our fish ponds back to mangroves for climate change mitigation, for the carbon that they capture, and so on. So I mentioned to you that I will talk about, this was my cover slide in 2009. And this is now what it is, the Leganes case study, which will lead me to the last case study, because the eco park in Leganes called Life was patterned after this KII. Some of you have been here, Katungan Itibay in Aklan. And this is for climate change mitigation. You protect remaining forests through eco parks so the carbon will not be released. It will remain sequestered or captured in the soil. And this site starts 1995. I was still with CFDEC. And then I had a Pew Fellowship, 2005. And then GSL came in 2009. And we passed an ordinance, or the municipality passed an ordinance protecting 44 hectares as an eco park. And it was inaugurated in 2010. That's the then mayor with London scientist of GSL. But you will note that we have all these publications, because when we have development projects, the research comes first. It is R&D. NGOs should not forget that R&D. It's not D&D, development and development without science. The research, the science should really come first. And so this is the hut that starts of that KII, Katungan Itibahay, and the footwalk made of bamboo, of course, not very good. So now it has been replaced with funding from TIESA, the FAR, the LGU, and so on. And even the footwalk now is wood. And it's been really developed last year with a grant project from GIZ, German government. Very nice. Now we have our training courses there. And the centerpiece of that place is the avatar tree that we call the big Avicennia rumphiana. It's 9 persons you need to go all around the tree. And we have, somebody said that okay, even before that, I want to highlight that what we see, the carbon we see, is only this red box. Most of the carbon in forests is below ground, the yellow box. So can you imagine this one going down so many meters and all the carbon stored? That's why we have to protect remaining mangroves, preferably as eco parks. And the question was asked, how old? So we tried to have it dated, but we were not successful. So we just compared with this Avicennia marina in Australia, about the same size, which was radiocarbon dated to 738 years. So we think that this avatar tree is, let's say, 700 to 800 years old. So it's still centuries old. And it's a favorite spot for wedding photos and also for training courses. This is our training course. Seb, again, joined one of these training courses, I don't know how many years ago. And even young school children are able to go there. This is a major, not only for conservation, for capturing carbon, but also for education of young school children, even older trainees, no? So, second to the last slide. The last 4 or 5 years, we have looked at the different mangrove sites and had best mangrove awards. The first mangrove award was Siargao won here. The second was Prieto Diaz in Sorsogon and Sev and Dixon have been some of the judges who have really contributed free time, no, and to visiting these mangroves. So lastly, we have documented all our learnings. We have these field guides, we have the manuals. If you're interested, you can inquire. And our last one was a manual on mangrove eco parks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jurgenne Primavera, for your presentation. It gave us a very stelling story on the state of our mangroves in the Philippines, and also stressing on the need to be guided by science on any of the programs regarding our mangroves. So before proceeding to our next speaker, I'd like to ask our participants, 462 participants joining us via Zoom, and 99 joining us from FB Live, to please fill up the attendance sheet for today's webinar. So they are posted in the chat room or the chat box in Zoom and the comment sections in Facebook Live. So moving on, I would like to call on Dr. Salmo for his presentation on the draft Philippine Mangrove Roadmap 2020-2030, implications on mangrove conservation and restoration. Dr. Salmo, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Is my audio clear?
Yes, sir.
All right. I'd like to thank the organizer for inviting us for sharing our advocacies and our progress on the mangrove road mapping program. I put the title there, quote and unquote, the draft Philippine Mangrove Roadmap 2020 to 2030, implications on mangrove conservation and restoration. So we will be basically discussing this document that was produced last year by the Conservation International Philippines, along with the other partners. So I have 4 general components for this presentation. I'll be going through with the background or process, how we came up with the document, the main features of the document. Then along the line, I'll be showing the challenges and opportunities. And lastly, my personal take on the recommendations, how to move forward with the roadmap. The document that you're seeing here is actually a product of a long documentation process of so many things. We actually started in 2014. Let me just share a bit of a story. At that time, we are literally, technically, practically begging for money to come up with a document like this. And the objective is really to come up with something that we can document on a regional basis, but eventually it could be on a national basis, trying to document what do we have and where do we want to go after that period. So we started in my TORP, I'm Manilocano, in Northwest Luzon in 2014. Then it was followed up by the Southern Luzon State of the Mangrove Summit. Then the most recent was in 2018, representing Central and Eastern Visayas. We are aware that the documentation we produced at that time will be valid only during that period, 2014, 2015, and 2018. And I have to mention that we are really begging for money to come up with the organizing of the summit. And the objective is like that, is to come up with a document. And luckily, I can see some local papers citing the work. Now, imagine if we don't have that basis years ago, 2014. But I have to commend sponsors and co-organizers. Maybe the topic was not as popular in 2014, but credit to the NGOs. I have to mention then Executive Director Godot Villapando for believing on on the advocacy of the State of the Mangrove reporting, Josel Pangilinan and Executive Director Ricky Nunez, then academician Rodel Lasco from the OML Research Center. When no one believes in us, these people, these institutions believe that there is really a need to document the state of the mangroves, at the least in the regional groupings. Eventually, we are also lucky through the assistance of then consultant to DNR, Dr. Vincent Hilomen. At some point, we got some support from the Biodiversity Management Bureau and that of the Ecosystems Research and Development Bureau. Now, the document was very instrumental in coming up with the draft Philippine Mangrove Roadmap. Just to share what happened in the State of the Mangrove Regional Summits, there were several participants. The main objective is really to invite regional participants coming from the state universities and colleges, but also from the regional regional DNR offices. So way back 2014, there have been several recommendations already. And I have to say, the participants were really very enthusiastic, very interested on coming up with the State of the Mangrove reporting. In fact, most of them really suggested to institutionalize regional mangrove summits, something that we at that time in 2014, we just wanted to come up with the documentation for that particular time. But eventually, we were also hoping that it should be picked up by someone else. Right. Now, here's the document. It was sponsored by the Conservation International Philippines, along with Forest Foundation Philippines and that of the BMB and ERDB. So, coming from lessons from the State of the Mangrove regional reports, the objective of the rationale for the National Mangrove Summit, the first National Mangrove Summit, is to revisit our experiences and lessons learned. Hence the title, Revisiting Learnings, but we should not stop there. And in fact, the other phrase is, how do we envision Philippine mangroves year 2030? Right? So the objectives are, one, to provide a venue for the provinces, or in this case, regions, to share and discuss the status of mangrove forests in the Philippines, come up with or invite experts in the field of mangrove ecology and climate change. Sorry, Dixon, I can see someone raising hands. Is my audio clear? Or?
Yes, sir. It's clear.
Oh, sorry. All right. So then consolidate a more accurate data set on mangroves from those regions, develop a plan of action and resolution to improve mangrove research, mangrove conservation policy and governance. And lastly, to propose a program or policy that will institutionalize and harmonize mangrove conservation at the national level. So we did work on those rationale and objectives. How did we structure the proceedings? That first, we requested reports from the key national government agencies. Then we requested regional offices of DNR to come up with the State of the Mangrove report per region. Then we also invited technical presentations from different expertise. Then we have 2 workshops. Then those workshops led to the formulation of the draft Philippine Mangrove Roadmap. What happens that there were several presentations from before topics regarding the AUU. It's about the abandoned, undeveloped, and underutilized public lands, quote unquote, released for peace fund purposes. Then it was followed by then Division Chief Ma'am Angie Menyado, wherein she presented the national programs on mangrove biodiversity and conservation. Then Dr. Moreno presented the research and initiatives for sustainable mangrove management in the Philippines, reviewing the historical trust of the agency for doing mangrove research and mangrove management. Then from FMB, there was a report on the state of forest land release for peace fund disagreements, FLAs, related to the presentation from BIPAR. And lastly, from NAMRIA, which presented mangrove distribution and extent, historical mangrove distribution and extent in the country. So from those national reports presentations, there were regional summaries. We asked each region to present the state of the mangroves. I'm not presenting you the specifics, but I'm presenting you the summarized reports from Dr. Rex Montebon, and he summarized the regional reports for Luzon. And the main advantage, the main features for mangroves in Luzon is that there are several mangrove areas, primarily in Palawan, that are already designated as either a key biodiversity area or INAIPAS, and along with it are some smaller units, smaller sizes, marine protected areas. Even then, despite the mangroves being in MPAs or in KBAs, take note that it has been having problems on conversion to peace funds. Take note still, but aside from peace funds and aside from typhoons, there have been massive reclamation happening that were, take note, reported by regional government offices, right? And from that document, there's been suggestions on improving or doing the mapping and monitoring. They actually suggested to come up with basic researches on biodiversity, adaptation, and resiliency, and improve that of the policy. Okay. If we look at the regional reports from Visayas, as reported by Dr. Castillo from ERDB, these are the state of the mangroves in regions 6, 7, and 8. The main strength is that there are several places in the Visayas that are known for high biodiversity. Some of them are even used for ecotourism. So there are very good case studies from the Visayas. How similar or different is it from the state of the mangroves in Luzon? There are similar issues on conversion to peace funds and that of massive reclamation projects. Now, from the Visayan perspective, there have been recommendations on proactive restoration, but also monitoring restoration programs. There have been conflicts on land use or land cover chains, and they suggested a clear documentation. On top of that documentation, there should be a sharing of best practices. If we look at Mindanao, as reported by Dr. Halun from Mindanao State University in Tawi-Tawi, relatively healthier. Some mangroves are under NAIPAS. Some of the mangroves are also practicing ecotourism, but and they are also taking advantage of a good network among SUCs and NGOs in Mindanao. What is similar with that of Visayas and Mindanao is that they are also beset by problems on coastal reclamation, sometimes even called a development project. But in the three regions, only Mindanao mentioned issues with mining. So they suggested there should be protection and restoration, and they should be able to enhance interagency collaboration. So from the State of the Mangrove regional reports, we also invited technical presentations from Attorney Gertie Mayo Anda, and she highlighted, similar to the recommendation of academician Primavera, there should be a clear reversion to mangroves. There's a mention of coastal green belts that should be harmonized with the National Land Use Act. She emphasized the role of NEDA and the regional NEDA offices, mainly because there are developmental projects that are overlapping or sometimes, oftentimes, are not consistent with MPAs and the conservation programs. Attorney Gertie also suggested interagency collaboration. Now, the presentation of Dr. Blanco and Mr. Baloloy focused on why are we having somewhat inconsistent estimates of mangrove distribution area and extent in the country? And Alvin Balola and Ariel Blanco trace the possible reason because there are several methods that were used, sometimes not consistent or not harmonized. So in their case, they suggested to standardize the mapping methods and protocols. Academician Lasco presented climate change and mangrove forests, and he suggested that there is really a need for us to assess the role of mangroves in the adaptation or possibly the vulnerability against typhoons and rising sea level. From Forest Foundation Philippines, Forester Eric Buduan presented the experiences of FFP in doing mangrove management in the country, some lessons and experiences. And academician Jurgenne mentioned Ramon Magsaysay awardee, Mr. Roberto Balyon. There are good case studies that we can learn throughout the country. We just have to listen and learn from those experiences. Right? Professor Dixon Gevaña came up with an estimate of carbon sequestration of mangroves in the Philippines. I believe the value that was given at that time could be around 600 to 800 megagrams carbon per hectare. But even Professor Gevaña also realized that there are differences in methods used throughout the country. Some of these studies are published, but some of these are found in gray literature. So there is a need to standardize or improve the methods for carbon stock and sequestration rates monitoring. He also came up with several suggestions on how to improve the estimates of carbon stocks and sequestration rates in the country. More importantly, Dixon came up with this proposal to come up with case studies to document and mainstream what could be a good possible factors for success, or simply put, what could be the good or best practices for carbon offsetting projects. Right. Now, from the National State of the Mangrove Workshop, there have been 2 workshops, and I need to emphasize that the participants are really working beyond 9 p.m., maybe because this is the first State of the Mangrove National Workshop. No one complained, at least not in our case. If you will see the picture here, this is beyond 9 p.m. People are really interested to come up with a roadmap. Now, when we look at the design of the workshops, there are 2 things. Again, the context is to learn our lessons and envision Philippine mangroves in 2030. There are several factors that were considered in designing the 2 workshops. Mainly, there are several international treaties and programs that the Philippine government is committed to, right? So I just have to mention the CBD, Convention on Biological Diversity, and we have the PBSAP document already, the UNFCCC, the UNSDG, not to mention the ASEAN Convention, and many other international treaties. So in workshop 1, we asked the groups what could be the facilitating and constraining factors that contributed to the state of your mangroves. And we grouped it based on the geographical distribution, Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. What were the gaps and issues that were identified that contributed to the state of the mangroves? And lastly, provide specific suggestions to address the gaps and issues. So we just summarize it. There are facilitating factors. Again, MPAs are mentioned, or the distribution of the KBAs, mangroves being located in KBAs, and also that of being a Ramsar site. But also there are constraining factors identified by the group. There are overlapping, sometimes conflicting policies. And I have to emphasize, in most cases in the country, despite the advances, despite the initiatives, there are still lack or absence of baseline information. I'm not even mentioning the map that are supposedly should be standard for its regional units. Limited funding and management plan has been always the case, but take note that common to the three groups, they mention the lack of technical guidance and capacity building, right? There are specific suggestions from Luzon. They wanted to come up with a monitoring team or monitoring network. I know for the case of Oriental Mindoro and Zambales, there have been provincial level type of monitoring, but they also mentioned in some cases or in most cases, there are practically no data set. In the event that there are data sets, most of it are obsolete or inconsistent. Why inconsistent? Why obsolete? Maybe there's a lack of coordination among government agencies. That's the reason why possibly the numbers that we are seeing are different when you go and visit one office to the other offices. If you look at the Visayas concerns, they suggested documentation and learnings and the presence of local mangrove alliances within the Visayan region. They also mentioned the presence of institutional experts. Academician Primavera is based in, of course, in Iloilo, so that there has been mention of the expertise in Visayas. But they also mentioned problems on unstandardized assessment methods. And in the event that there are presented results, most of it are not validated. There has been a mention of well and good that there have been restoration programs, but I have to emphasize here that those are oftentimes inappropriate practices. In the case of Mindanao, I forgot PPPs and I know corporate social responsibilities. They have been practicing recognition and incentives, and they are benefiting from community engagement at the regional level, but they are also needing resource valuation and limited technical capacity for Mindanao. So these are the lessons in the past. The second workshop was highlighted by these questions on how do we want to envision Philippine mangroves in 2030. 2030 is set already because of the several commitments that the Philippine government agreed to. And we divide the groups into three thematic topics. One on biodiversity, and that includes conservation and restoration. Second, on climate change, the adaptation to rising sea level, typhoons, but also we group blue carbon under climate change, and then the other group on policy and governance. We simply ask the groups, what could be the priority programs for those three thematic topics? And we ask them to come up with a roadmap. Take note, this is 2019 all the way to 2030. We ask the groups what could be their desired milestones or indicators for year 1 should be 2020, year 2 is 2021, and so on and so forth, so that by 2030, we will be able to know what could have been our progress. Then we also ask the groups to describe the research and policy needs to implement their identified programs. And we also ask them to describe what could be the possible facilitating and constraining factors that will affect the identified programs. So in the document, in the draft Philippine Mangrove Roadmap, these are, you can find this for, I think the document is already shared publicly. You can access the document. But for biodiversity group, they came up with this. Please take note of the vision. Again, learning from science, and the basis was the 2030 targets. By 2030, guided by science, mangroves are effectively conserved and restored. Biodiversity will be systematically assessed, and there could be mangroves that will be under protected areas. AUU fish funds are reverted to mangroves, and there could be mangrove information datasets that are updated, not obsolete, obviously, and should be publicly available. By year 2020, year one, this could have been delivered. There should be a baseline map and biodiversity reports already. By year two, in 2021, there could be enrichment planting in NGP sites, and there could be fund sourcing from DNR and donors. So that by year 2030, we should be able to witness within our lifetime at least an increase of 20% mangrove cover. There could be increased mangrove under protected areas, and this number, 60,000 hectares in protected areas or NGP sites. And lastly, there should be a third biodiversity assessment by 2030. In terms of climate change group, they have this vision on guided by science, mangroves are conserved and restored towards climate resilient and sustainable coastal communities. Take note of that word science-based and increased mangrove cover and restored in proper zone. Following the suggestion of academician Primavera, there should be at the least 4:1 mangrove to fish pond ratio, so that by year one in 2020, there should be a baseline vulnerability assessment against rising sea level nationwide, and there should be a mapping of natural and restored mangrove stands. Mapping is needed to prioritize. We cannot practically restore mangroves throughout the country, but we want to identify and prioritize where can we do restoration programs, so that by year 10, 2030, there could have been impact assessment already. The effectiveness of green belts or the effectiveness of our restoration programs are monitored and reported by 2030. And there should be an institutionalized climate financing mechanism. In terms of policy and governance, if you notice, the vision is that there should be a unified interagency mangrove action plan that is developed with updated mangrove maps, with a clear implementation of CBFM, with clear and improved funding for mangrove conservation and restoration. So this could be achieved with funding for MPAs, mangroves in NIPAS and Ramsar sites. Technically, at the least, they should receive funding already. But what the group is proposing is that even those mangroves that are outside the protected areas or outside of NIPAS should also receive appropriate funding. By year one, there should be an interagency review and harmonization of mangrove policies, so that by year 10 in 2030, hopefully, it should not reach 2030 sana. We're also hoping that in the next coming years, there should be an institutionalized mangrove management policies already, and there should be incentives for local mangrove management practices. And synonymous to the biodiversity group, this group wanted to see at least 20% increase in mangrove areas, right? The document was launched officially on October 15, 2021. There have been several commitments to pursue the adoption and formalization of the draft mangrove roadmap. Hopefully, it will not be called draft anymore. There have been commitments released by then BMB Director Dato Saikol from BMB. There have been commitments from FMB, ERDB. UPLB was represented by Professor Dixon Gevaña. I recall Professor Miguel Cortez was also there, but we invited Professor Catherine Lablack, one of the key icons on mangrove ecology research, champion on blue carbon research worldwide. she came up with an analysis that the drop roadmap was really good, that puts Philippines in the context, in the perspective of global mangrove research and management. She emphasized the need to come up with a institutionalized assessment of carbon stock assessment and greenhouse gas assessment. No? Right. We know that there has been issues with the draft roadmap. Whatever we accomplished in 2019, we realize that there are some gaps that needs to be addressed. By June 2022, this year, there's been another follow-up workshop trying to revise or improve the draft roadmap. It was attended again by regional DNR offices and key national government agencies. Right? I will not show the individual reports, but just to show some ideas what happened in the second workshop. We asked the groups to come up with a review and recalibration of the roadmap, because we practically lost 2 years and counting. Hopefully, those gaps and challenges that were identified here, along with the identified activities, would be good enough to realize still our targets by 2030, right? Now, from Climate Change Commission, we asked that comment how to move forward with the mangrove roadmap. And from their perspective, there's a need to make sure that the roadmap will be mainstream and incorporated in the local climate change adaptation plan. But they are also hoping that the roadmap will be institutionalized soon. The perspective of ERDB states that to be able to proceed, there is a need to obviously operationalize the roadmap, but they also came up with a very good suggestion. Roadmap is good. It will provide us a policy and a direction, but at the same time, we also need a work and financial plan. The perspective from FMB, Forest Management Bureau, states that there are details to the roadmap that are needed, and they need to consult with other divisions within the Bureau. And hopefully, this is a good sign. FMB is already doing the plotting of areas, not just the numbers, but the plotting of areas released to BIFAR that needs to accomplish with together with BIFAR. If you look at the comment from the Biodiversity Management Bureau, of course, there is a realization that the roadmap, including that of the recalibrated roadmap, needs refinement, needs a series of review and focus group discussions. I don't know if you're counting how many people mention institutions that needs to be a part of the roadmap. There's a need to clarify jurisdictions. BMB recognized the need for data sets, updated data sets. Luckily, last June, NAMRIA committed to provide the needed data sets. The USAID program to the Peace Right programs willing to provide data sets that were generated from the project. But for me, this is a good sign that although we realized that there could be challenges along the way that could constrain the formalization of the roadmap, the BMB realized that the roadmap as it is can be a standalone plan that can be incorporated in the current PBSAP document. The PBSAP document will be finalized hopefully by next year so that we can go through the same exercise. BioFin has a funding for biodiversity, and BMB is also thinking that maybe there could be a parallel exercise that the roadmap can be financed as well. Lastly, they mentioned that even if the roadmap is not finalized yet, some of the sections of the roadmap can be anchored in other national plans, at the least with PBSAP, and hopefully also with the Philippine Development Plan. Now, these are the perspectives from the national government agencies. If you look at the perspectives from the Forest Foundation Philippines, FFP, they mentioned that there's a need to have a clearer path to 2030. The roadmap as it is quite straightforward. But they're also looking for some clarifications. They are suggesting more science-based methodologies and a finer or a clearer or more specific goals. But they also are somewhat satisfied process-wise. There are a series of smaller workshops wherein the roadmap can be discussed in details. Rare Philippines mentioned that the specific details are already provided in the current version, but there are needs to prioritize activities and identify complementary programs. Again, they are mentioning the need to consolidate and share dataset. The perspective of JSL, we need to fine-tune the results of the workshop similar to the perspective of FFP. Then each thematic group can refine the workshop outputs, although it can be done virtually. But to ensure operationalization, it is important to have a budget allocation for the roadmap. Same thing with the Wetland International Philippines. They mentioned about their commitment to complete the roadmap. And the roadmap can be linked to other plans. They mentioned NBSAP. WWF Philippines mentioned the initiatives, and we need more opportunities for harmonizing and identifying opportunities for collaboration. From the NGO's perspectives, we go with the regional perspective from the regional DNR offices. I will not mention one by one. Some of it mentioned, I hope you can see the institutions that are being mentioned here, the need for consolidated and updated data set. Some of them is explicitly mentioned that the roadmap as it is are already helpful in planning and setting targets. These are from regional offices from Luzon, from Visayas. This is my mistake. I cannot locate the perspective from Region 7. This is not the fault of the Secretariat. From Region 6 and Region 8, there's a mention of the need for data sets. The roadmap activities should be included in their work plans in the regional offices. In terms of Mindanao, there's a need to come up with calibration and harmonizing targets. Now, this is the opposite from the regional offices with that of the central offices, right? If I will summarize the perspectives for the current roadmap, there are so many things to digest. I can say personally that there is a mixture of satisfaction and hope. Obviously, the roadmap is a good document, but at the same time, there are doubts and complexities, not to mention uncertainties. How can we move forward? There's a lot coming from that list. I will go with the minimum referring to my personal perspective, what could be needed at the list. And I'm coming from the perspective and experiences for more than 20 years. I put in here the things that we are experiencing now. I don't know the age profile of the attendees here, but the things that we're seeing now are somewhat reminiscent of 1990s, wherein there's a need for industrial development, the need for allocating residential areas, maybe the need for coming up with resorts, maybe the need to coming up with industries, or maybe the need for a new airport. So here, we need to have those minimum deliverables for us to assess if we have the data sets that is updated, not obsolete, and it should be used as basis for, if we look forward come 2030, how effective or ineffective are our conservation and restoration programs. So that, for me, in my opinion, there's a need to incentivize successful management. Academician Primavera mentioned a lot in the Visayan region. There are so many things to learn from those exercises, from those programs. This will form the I forgot the term, Ma'am Jurgenne, but it's the awarding, sorry, now remember, the Best Mangrove Award that is given every 2 years. Maybe we can reflect what made those Best Mangrove awardees doing that we can be emulating in our respective site. So in the academy, we want data set, not because we are data hungry, not because we want to document, we just want to produce data set, but those data sets should be open access as a means for us to assess how effective or ineffective are our programs. And if we have an open access database, then we can institutionalize the state of the mangrove reporting. Hopefully, the state of the mangrove reports that we institutionalized in 2014 can be happening every 2 years or every year if you want to, right? All of these are anchored in the international commitments in CBD, which is already in PBSAP, the UNFCCC, we committed 75% reduction in greenhouse gas emission. And we are now at the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, also ending in 2021 to 2030. This is a product of remote sensing, table desktop analysis. The authors came up with that estimates. There are an estimated 156 square kilometer area, mangrove areas in the Philippines that needs to be restored. The basis for estimation was given in the document, but I encourage the group, maybe we can calibrate or recalibrate where are the priority restoration areas in the country, right? I will skip these slides. Similar to what academician Primavera mentioned, there are natural recolonization that could happen. But here, take note, after 20 years, no one did an active planting. It's a natural colonization. Nature takes its course, but I hope that the recolonized mangroves will not be threatened by the attempt to convert those recolonized mangroves to fish ponds again. Remember where we came from. Remember what problems we had in the 1980s and 1990s. Never forget what happened, what could have been our problems and our possible problems in the next coming years. Learn lessons from our experience. Here, blue carbon is a popular topic. In fact, there is a market, carbon offset, carbon trading. We documented that there are good studies on blue carbon studies in the mangroves. But take note, 80% of those studies are foreign funded, meaning if the trend continues, then obviously this is not sustainable, right? Here, paper accepted around last week or 2 weeks ago, the different topics or keywords that were used in publication in Southeast Asian region. Take note that blue carbon is right here in the middle. It's really getting popular in the Philippine context. Maybe we can interpret it as a good indicator, but come to think of it, the emphasis on research is somewhat shifting, whether it's good or bad. Well, it's good that we have publication records, but it's not really good because we are losing attention, we are losing focus. Whatever the trend is, we tend to follow whatever the trend is. Remember the basics, never forget what we learned from the past, right? So this is my last slide. If you look at the draft mangrove roadmap, maybe next time we meet, I will be able to remove the quote and unquote draft. Hopefully it will be finalized soon. There are still needs, and obviously we realize that. I'm bringing in the slide a mixture of satisfaction and hope, but also doubts and uncertainties. Looking at the theme, turning the tide, if you use an oceanographic terminology, I like the term, but there are two types. Are we using upwelling? You want to recycle or improve dioxygen and improve productivity. Are we downwelling? Are we repeating the same mistakes? I can't recall the exact number of times that me and academician Primavera were together in the same event, same workshops, same conferences. We're saying the same things over and over again. Maybe, Ma'am Jurgenne, we're saying it for more than 10 years, perhaps more than 20 years. Let's issue a challenge for us. Status quo is no longer an option. I hope this will be not a case of downwelling. I hope it will be a case of upwelling. There are so many things for us to contribute. I hope that we realize, all of us will be realized that when we turn the tide, it will be for the good reason. Never forget. Thank you so much.
Okay, a big round of applause to our speakers, Doc Sev and Doc Jurgenne. Thank you very much for that very interesting and informative presentations. Before we proceed, for our participants, we have a mixed audience from the academe. We have at least 183. From DNR, around 200. LGUs, around 20, NGOs, SUCs around 30, private and others. So, and second to the government offices are the students. We have a lot of participants coming from the students as well. Okay, last webinar, we have invited some speakers from those LGUs mentioned by Doc Jurgenne, like the municipality of Leganes, Prieto Diaz, and Del Carmen in Siargao. Coming from those mangrove specialists, Doc Jurgenne and Doc Sev, indeed, mangrove rehabilitation and conservation is really a challenging task. Challenging because of the many factors like social, yung human activities and practices, environmental, so we have the climate change, technical, which include absence of baseline data, and standards, and then even institutional like funding. So therefore, it needs a unified, sabi nga po ni Doc Sev, and concerted effort of all concerned. And of course, it should be science and ecologically guided. With the presentation of Doc Sev on the Philippine roadmap for mangrove resources, we could say that at least we're leading towards achieving the goal of sustainable mangrove management. And with that, now this is the exciting part of our webinar, which is the open forum. To start with, can we see Doc Jurgenne on the screen, please? To start with, here is a question. Andito po kaya si Doc Jurgenne? Yan. Okay, ma'am. There you go, para makita natin si ma'am. The first question is for Doc Jurgenne from an anonymous participant. What model or framework can you suggest for mangrove rehabilitation or projects in areas intended near a reclamation project? Like primary reason for reclamation is to minimize traffic congestion. So any other model or framework daw po?
I think hindi clear, no? Yung area will be reclaimed. So if the area will be reclaimed, wala nang mangrove. Ganun ba? So is there still a possibility for another option for saving the mangroves? Kasi maybe the one who asked the question can clarify. Kasi if the mangrove area is really critical, is really important, it will be the public na, no? The stakeholders, like what happened in Dumaguete. Yung nila, they will reclaim it and make a big something for development. And because the science was there from Silliman and other academic institutions, other experts, they were able to put up a stand to the reclamation. So the question is there enough information ba to value the area that will be reclaimed? Will it be critical? Will the value be much more critical than the gains kung i-reclaim siya to solve the traffic congestion, ganon. So medyo yun ang my take on it right now.
Okay, ma'am. Doc Seb, baka po meron kayong gustong idagdag?
Kaya ni Ma'am Jurgenne. I honestly don't know. I've seen mangrove sites that were conserved effectively. Some of it were restored effectively for 20 years. No? Nag-grow na yung mangrove, nag-develop na yung mangroves. Then all of a sudden, i-reclaim yung pinaghirapan natin ng 20 years. Kakalimutan ba natin? Di ba? Kaya never forget where we came from. Yung bang value ng reclamation ay synonymous or equivalent dun sa ecosystem services na pinoprovide ng mangroves. I think that's the basis nung suggestion ni Attorney Gerty nung sa summit. This developmental project should be properly coordinated for and harmonized for conservation. May short answer, Judith. Hindi ko alam yung ano bang priority natin. The things that we committed in the international community or the localized needs?
Okay, thank you po. From that anonymous participant, so we know the answer po. So, kailangan i-weigh yung mga bagay-bagay. Pero, based on the answers nga po, much more on the ecology side. Ano po? Okay. Another question po for both speakers from Earl Juanico. Typically, policymakers act after a major disaster takes place, a typical reactive strategy. What does it take for policymakers to understand the importance of mangrove restoration before any disasters occur? Next, are there gaps in communicating the message to policymakers? And if yes, do you have recommendation how the projected impacts of destroying and not restoring mangroves can influence the mindset of future policymakers? Perhaps some compelling way to present the evidence. Okay po. First, what does it take for policymakers to understand the importance of mangrove restoration? And then gaps in communicating the message. Then recommendation how the projected impacts and not restoring mangroves can influence the mindset of policymakers and compelling way to present the evidence.
Sige, ladies first, Seb.
Yes.
Kasi yung first question, iwan ko yan kay Seb. You need a younger person and more hopeful person. Ako medyo, Seb, hindi lang 20 years, 30 years na. I looked at my first scientific papers on coastal green belts and pond reversion 30 years ago na. So medyo napapagod na ako at tumatanda na. Ikaw na dyan sa first, what will it take to convince them? Kasi my whole life has been trying to convince them. Dun sa second question, yung communication. I think we need more, we have a lot of experts. Ang Philippines, ang galing sa human resources. Tingnan mo lang yung mga Filipinos in international, nasa United Nations, kung saan-saan. So, we are not maximizing use of those resources. Halimbawa, yung kahapon, I had an interview with UPLB DevCom. DevCom is they have all the, they're studying all the ways to, to be effective communicators. So, let's pull them in, no? And then, how can we, kasi yung isang question nila, how can we, the science communication? Ang sagot ko, teleserye. Kasi half the housewives of the Philippines nakikinig, nanonood ng teleserye, no? More than half siguro. And then ipasok mo yung marine themes, yung marine, kunyari, you have the daughter of a fish pond operator, no? Si Bea Alonso, that was 5 years ago. Ngayon si somebody else, the son of an ascendero, and then the son of a municipal fisher naman. So kunyari love triangle, pero you sip into the script yung marine themes mo, no? Na educate yung nakikinig ng teleserye on these marine themes. Malay mo baka wife ni senator or wife ni mayor, ganun. We don't know, no? And then subliminally na ano na, uy, ganun pala, kawawa pala yung mga dugong, ganun. So I think itong communication kami ni Sev, we spend all our energy na on science, on doing research, na wala nang natitira. Actually, itong kay Sev, itong roadmap, mag-organize na yan, that's already beyond his terms of reference as a scientist. But we do this. But I think it's time sa communication, pasok na natin yung mga DevCom, and then we can be more creative. Maybe, let's try it, kasi we have not really tried it. So yun ang sagot ko sa second, si Sev na sa first.
Yung sa first question ni Dr. Juanico, yung proactive, I don't know, honestly, when the Philippines was hit by Yolanda, I thought, honestly, that will be an eye-opener for us, that we realized already in 2013 the value of mangroves, and honestly, yung mga mangrove losses in terms of cutting per se, I don't think hindi na siya issue eh. May mga mangroves ba na nako-convert pa sa fish ponds? Maybe yes, but not as rampant as 1970s, 1980s. What is more apparent at the moment, yung mga reclamation projects na akala ko ba ay we are in common understanding that we want to protect biodiversity. So, siyempre ayaw naman natin ng may another Yolanda incident, but we're also hoping that there could be a good network of scientists or mangrove enthusiasts. Sana may ganung perspective na we band together and come up with a strong network, etc. Ngayon, yung in terms of mindset and yung sa media, siguro weakness naman talaga ng scientist yung pag-popularize ng media, and I'm also communicating with the mga social science students and comm students. Hopefully ma-integrate yung science natin. But having said that, sana yung imagine the amount of biodiversity that we don't know yet from those different sites, all of a sudden marireclaim or will be converted into something else. Hindi natin alam anong nangyayari doon at hindi na natin siya marereport kasi nga na-reclaim na. Now, if we are looking for compelling reasons, hindi ba signatory tayo ng several treaties? Remember that we promised a lot in that document. Isn't that enough reason that we convince ourselves and our policymakers that, hey, we committed years ago that we will deliver this? What's the status of our commitments? Sorry, Judith, binalik ko yung tanong.
Thank you po. Parang lahat ng tanong bumabalik, sir? Maganda po yung strategy ni Ma'am. Exciting at the same time. Challenging pagdating po sa communication. And then, yun naman po sinabi ni Doc Sev, marami po tayong mga participants from the academy. So siguro po nga it's time para ma-consider din po sa curriculum yung mga ganitong bagay. Okay, another question po for Doc Sev from Anonymous again. Ayaw magpakilala po nito, masyado mahihain po itong ating mga participants. What is the Central Office DNR's commitment on the roadmap to institutionalize or mainstream in its regional offices? Wala daw po kasing nabanggit dun sa presentation.
Yeah, I think may short answer to that ay naka-drop mode pa yung document. Those who attended the meeting in June 2022, nakalagay naman doon na the central office will communicate to the regional offices and vice versa. No? So my short answer, please wait for the official communication. And I think if there are BMB people here, maybe they can answer directly.
Okay, wala po sasagot from DNR. Baka po may gusto magtaas ng kamay. We'll just wait for you to raise your hand so you could answer. Okay. Ito po, meron pong katanungan ulit. Inquiry po ito. Are there groups around Central Luzon that we can tap for a science-based mangrove planting? Baka daw po kayong merong may suggest kasi meron po atang naghahanap ng assistance.
Kasi I'm from the north, no? That's my turf nga. The top of my mind, I can mention, I think Olive Gregorio is here from Masinloc, Zambales. They have good experiences already in mangrove conservation and restoration. Pero teka muna, sabi ni Ma'am Jurgenne kanina, yung pakitanong lang, doon sa interested sa planting, do we really need to plant?
Yun po. Ano po? Bumalik na naman po yung ating tanong.
Hindi kasi
hindi sir.
I like restoration. That's my field, no? Restoration ecology. But we have to ask that basic question. Maybe we are wasting our money and time. Baka naman hindi kailangang taniman. Or kung sakali mang magtatanim tayo, doon tayo sa mga abandoned fish ponds.
I hope klaro po ito. And ulitin ko po yung binanggit ni Sir. Baka po si Sir Olive Gregorio.
Miss Olive Gregorio.
Olive Gregorio. Sorry po. Okay.
Can I add to that yung sa planting protocols na science-based?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, in ZSL, we have training courses, pero of course, intensive ito, no? 4 days and 3 nights, something, lectures and hands-on. Pero mainly yung within the Visayas. Meron ding minsan-minsan na they have projects funded, so they send their people, like Pampalawan, yung Sibol, ganun, katatapos lang nila ng intensive training courses. So we have those training courses. We also have manuals, at least yung in the first instance, pwede mang basahin yung manual. Some of our manuals, one on community-based mangrove rehabilitation, another on abandoned ponds, another on yung beach forest, kung ano pa, the latest one on mangrove eco parks for LGUs, no, that have kahit 10 hectares lang na mangroves or 20, pwede na yun kung healthy siya. Kahit plantation, kahit hindi siya natural mangrove, pero healthy siya, like in Leganes, healthy, pwede na yun i-eco park, no? Kasi that's the best way to really protect for conservation for the carbon. Although yung best mangrove champion last year, yung Prieto Diaz, walang eco park. Yun ang maganda doon. It's the whole community. Kasi yung mayor nila, 20 years ago, he was a teenager kasama dun sa PO na nagpo-protect ng mangrove. So talagang the community nag-converge, yung community, yung local government, yung PO, and they don't need an eco park, no, to protect their mangroves, and it's part of their So yun siguro, yun ang opposite nung experience namin doon sa Yolanda. Si Sev was with the Leyte group, kami were with the Samar group. Namin, we shared it, no, na no more yung bakaw, kasi yun ang namatay, yung mga bakaw na yun. And then we even talked to si Senator Panfilo, who was the SAR of the whatever, no. It was really, if you think about it, it was a very big slap on the face of the scientists. Kasi kami, we did not need to go out to share, no, pero we did 3 national fora. Hindi pinansin yung recommendations namin. Nung nirinis yung 1 billion pesos, bakaw pa rin. Bakaw was pouring out of everybody's ears. And then nung nagre-report na on mga results of the post-Yolanda rehabilitation, ayan, makikita mo yung all the regions of the ENR reporting. Nandun yung seagrass beds. Nandun yung tungki, which is what they call in the Visayas, sa seagrass beds. So our science was really ignored. It was ignored. It was thrown into the garbage. So ako, I do not want to think about it that way na. Kasi masakit eh. Insulting, masakit na and everything. Ang hirap kaya mag-survey doon. Sir, doon, no? Nandun kami, nagsusurvey kami sa Samar, sa Kinapundan. Ang tubig pumapasok na, so we have to rush. Mabilis para hindi kami maabutan ng high tide doon sa ano. But we needed to do it. So, yun ang ano ko, yung local governments, yung ano nila, receptiveness, like Preto Diaz, and I know si Sev may experience din siya sa Preto Diaz, and yung sa Yolanda, na we really went our way, and it was not at all, ano, and I don't even want to go into institutional reasons. Institutions have their own agenda na, no? When it comes to ano, itong funding kasi yan, that's big money, that's big bucks. And when big bucks are concerned, ay, ang hirap na. Ano, Seb? So, I'll stop talking there na lang.
Okay, ma'am, thank you for that information based from your experiences. Okay. Sir, there is a comment po ba ito? For Doc Seb from Ma'am Elsa. If we were to engage communities in mangrove restoration, we should allow mangrove-dependent communities to do some pruning of planted mangrove species, which are obviously too closely planted, and they can use the pruned branches as fuel wood. Pruning is part of mangrove management, and PO should be allowed to exercise this. DNR can supervise the POs or monitor the process.
Yeah, me and Sir Dixon have been talking about it for, I don't know how many years already. But yes, we agree. Yun naman yung concept ng CBFM. Let the recipient communities benefit from those restoration projects. However, yung current policy kasi as in totally no cutting medyo tricky, but we do recognize that if we want to encourage community participation, then obviously there's a need for them to realize the benefits from their management activities. Sila kasi nagsimula nung nag-implement ng project tama lang na sila din yung mag-benefit.
Okay, thank you, sir. From anonymous participant po ulit for our two speakers. What can you say about the use of NIPA in reclaiming abandoned fish ponds? Locals would like to use it to be able to get vinegar in the long run. Any advice daw po?
Si ma'am.
Ma'am, kayo daw po.
Okay, kasi matagal na yung NIPA, no? I come from Caraga, I come from Agusan, and also in Surigao, where Nipa wine is traditional. Yung laksoy, no? They convert yung sap of the inflorescence to vinegar and then eventually to wine. So yun ang high value end of Nipa plantations. The low value yung shingles, of course, yung leaves niya, mura lang yan, no? And yung freshwater nipa, yun ang mas mura, yung salt nipa na mas sturdy, yun ang mas mataas ang rates. Now I think ang ecologically nipa are monocots. Ito na ako. Very shallow ang roots nila. They do not help in terms of soil protection, in terms of biodiversity. We had a British master student, nagtingin siya ng crab diversity. Doon sa may nipa, mababa, of course. Kasi puro nipa roots, hindi na makakabaro ang crabs. Not like if you have dicots, like the api-api and the pagatpat, or even bakaw, nakakabaro sila. So, for biodiversity, nipa is not advisable. So, ang suggestion ko, if the area is substantial, mag-zonation na lang. There should be a zone for nipa lang, and then they make money out of it, profits. Mas okay sana kung yung vinegar, higher end products, no? In fact, in that Agusan distillery, nung nag-start ang COVID, university went there and produced alcohol from the nipa. Kasi in short supply ang alcohol, no? And then the plantations, nipa plantations around Manila Bay at the turn of the century were for alcohol. Ang alcohol natin was from those nipa plantations. So depende kung substantial area, you can zone some of it for commercial use. Pero kung maliit lang siya, I think no, and especially kung coastal siya, definitely not kasi hindi siya effective ecologically. And yun, yung abandoned ponds, pwede siguro yung abandoned ponds, but that has to be harmonized. Ang gulo-gulo ng abandoned ponds between DNR, BIFAR, and the local government. Kasi yung local government nagki-claim din ng ponds by the tax declaration, no? So it's a complicated answer, pero complicated naman talaga ang mangroves, yun lang.
Okay. Doc Seb, meron po kayong idadagdag? Okay na po.
Okay na.
Yes po. So, pwede naman po pala, pero sa abandoned fish ponds, kaya lang, medyo marami pa rin pong issues or pwede naman po, dapat lang merong i-observe po yung talagang zonation. Okay. Another question po, is there any baseline studies on the evaluation of mangrove ecosystems, and kindly cite an example that was conducted in our country? Evaluation of mangrove daw po. Anyone po?
The closest in my mind is the one by Waves Project sa Palawan. Although there are several caveats din kasi doon sa findings. We know the case in Palawan, no? Madaming mangroves. Hindi naman lahat ng mangroves sa Pilipinas kagaya ng Palawan. And obviously, yung value na it could range of millions of pesos per unit area is not really representative ng buong Pilipinas. I think there are several other studies pero nasa gray literature. Yung baseline, yun yung pinopoint out nga din namin, kala ko 20 years mo, pinopoint out namin for 30 years na pala, walang masyadong baseline eh. So, palagi tayong bumabalik dun sa baseline na issue.
Pero Seb, can I
yes.
Seb, I think kung i-evaluation mo yung present mangroves, hindi Palawan, yung more of non-Palawan na degraded. Tapos i-ano mo sa potential kung overpass or kung anong mga development projects, siyempre mababa yung sa mangroves, except kung ang mangrove coastal, tapos mag-assume ka ng mga milyonaryo, so yung isang taong mamatay 1 million na yon, ganon. I would go that way. It should be potential, it should not be present value kasi that's not fair to compare, I think. But I agree, dapat may we should have ongoing valuation studies.
Okay, again, balik po tayo sa isang challenge, yung absence po ng baseline data. Okay. Sir Seb, meron po ditong tanong sa inyo. Sabi niya, Sir, how to enroll in your class in UP? Pero meron pa po siyang kasunod na tanong. Ito po yung can we plant mangroves in Dolomite Beach? What species? Medyo maganda po ata yung discussion nila sa chat, sa dito, sa chat group.
Again, disclaimer, hindi ko laman ng age profile ng group. Yeah, if you know the history of Manila Bay, I was born 1974. But for some of the audience here, you know that the Manila Bay is actually a reclaimed land. So right there and then, 1980s, malalim na talaga yun. Kung if we will insist again on planting, baka mahirapan. I'm second guessing yung nagtanong, because our institute came up with a statement dun sa Dolomite planting. If I recall correctly, what we suggested is that portion sa Dolomite ay maliit na portion lang ng Manila Bay. If we want to restore Manila Bay, then it should be on the most suitable sites. Again, babalik tayo dun sa zonation na marami namang katabi dun sa Dolomite Beach. Baka pwedeng yun na lang ang i-restore. Let's assume that you will plant the right species. But the restoration site, in this case, the Dolomite Beach that's being proposed, malalim eh. Reclaimed na siya to begin with. Mahihirapan ang restoration doon.
Okay, Ma'am Jurgenne, would you like to add?
I'd like to extend the time context going back may paper sila rin enroll yun eh, na pre-something, 70,000 hectares ang mangroves dyan. And then pre-something pa, 90,000 all the way to Candaba Swamp. Ang Candaba Swamp for mangroves. So if we think about it that way, kung mag-restore ako ng mangroves, I would look at the place. Ano bang requirement ng mangroves? Tidal flow and the substrate, no? Yung elevation. So, yung fish ponds, tidal flow yan ngayon eh. So if we apply the 4:1, ang daming fish ponds dyan na very low ang efficiency. The reason, no? Malaki yung hectares ng fish pond operators in the Philippines. Tag 20 hectares. Yung iba nga dito sa Region 6 up to 100 hectares. If you compare to Thailand or Vietnam, 1.6 hectares sa Thailand. No? Maliit kasi very efficient. Tons per hectare ang production nila. So they get profits. Kasi nandun sila full-time. Yung ating fish pond operator dito, part-time lang. They are lawyers, teachers, engineers. They go visit their ponds weekends. Yung enkargado, yung caretaker ang nagmamanage. So very poor management. Mahina ang profit. Hinahabol yung profit by the hectareage. Kaya wide hectares. It's very inefficient. So ang dun is sana full-time farmers, fish farmers, para maliit lang yung area, mataas ang production. You get that? And then some of that area i-release mo into mangroves para yung fisher folk, sila naman may fisheries din sila. So makaka-share, no? Kasi I just came from fisheries management area discussion. Ang lumalabas ng all the reports in FMA 11, puro undersized ang huli ang catches nila. Ito yung size, halimbawa 10 cm total length ang first maturity. Ang mga huli nila 8 cm, 5 cm, undersized. And then especially for the municipal fishers, no? Sabi nung nagre-report kasi wala silang choice. Wala nang fish kasi so what can we do? So one obvious way is yung abandoned ponds, ibalik para may mangrove sila. Pag may mangrove sila, mayroon silang fish, may shellfish, may they don't have to catch the undersized. Likewise, in Manila Bay, if you project it that way, kaya lang ako, I'm not thinking about social classes. No, yun siguro, Seb. We have to bring in the sociologists kasi syempre these are, people in position, in power, with money. Pero if you just ask me ecologically, that's the way I will look at, never mind the Dolomite, look at the fish ponds. And what is the ecological ratio that will be sustainable na you move some of that into mangroves, especially yung sa surge area where you have vulnerability, yun, mangroves mo yan, and then leave a certain portion for fish production as the pond owners to really push, make it efficiently producing, and you can, that's where you plant the mangroves, hindi sa Dolomite, Sep,
Okay, thank you po. Ayan, nadagdagan ang ating knowledge about Dolomite Beach. Sabi nga ni Ma'am Jurgenne, never mind the Dolomite, focus on the ecology. Okay, baka po merong gusto magtanong live from our participants. Just raise your hand para ma-unmute po namin kayo. Okay, sir, meron po ditong tanong. Is there a best season for mangrove planting, or can we plant the whole year round?
Naku, habagat amihan yan, no? You should know you are in a country with 20 typhoons a year, and then depende on which side of the island ka, kung saan manggagaling yung sa Panay Island, habagat season yun ang pangit sa Northern Panay. Ang amihan season ang pangit. Habagat is when they should plant. Ang Southern Panay naman, Iloilo, we should plant during the amihan. So it's when the typhoons are the least damaging, na walang typhoons, then that's when you plant. It used to be, may typhoon season tayo na klarong-klaro, no? But with climate change, wala na. Ang gulo-gulo na. Halos the whole year, nag-abot na yung typhoon season. So you have to check for your region kung kailan. Yun ang number one mo, yung typhoons and all the wind waves. Yeah.
Doc Seb?
Yeah, same answer, depending on where you are.
Okay, noted po. So related po doon sa sinabi po ni Ma'am Jurgenne, as climate change is predicted to promote sea level rise, should we consider planting or adjusting planting of mangrove towards higher areas?
Ang this is may term yan, adjustment to sea level rise is managed migration or something like that, no? Not all areas can have a migration of mangroves, no? Kasi first, dapat may sediment ka. Yung areas near rivers, yun, kakaroon ng sediment, pwede mag-colonize gradually, no? Kung steep ang area, hindi na mag-ano yan ang mangroves. You cannot save the mangroves. So I think, yes, in fact, if you consider that, dapat din na talaga sa seagrass beds kasi malulunod na yan in a few years at X centimeters a year, no? Dapat talaga you stick to the upper and middle intertidal zones. Doon ang planting.
Biologically speaking, mangrove has the capacity to migrate inland kasi there are species that are inland din naman talaga. We've been witnessing, halimbawa sa US, mga marsh areas and even in Australia, salt marsh na nako-colonize ng mangroves as a response to rising sea level nga. In our case, however, thank you for that question. Kasi kung nag-adapt naman pala sana si mangrove sa rising sea level, so wala sana tayong problema. Kaso yung areas na supposedly pupuntahan ng migrating mangroves, those are occupied by, not Dolomite, by residential areas, by resorts, or by airports. Now, Singapore is very smart. Yung kanilang national government, binibili niya yung mga, not all of course, but binibili niya yung portion ng tidal areas in anticipation for a rising sea level. Of course, you can argue they have the financial means to do it. But let me throw a question again. Hindi ba kung ang concern natin ay survival ng ating citizens, hindi ba mas tama na i-adapt natin yung ating policy na I'm not asking that we buy the land that the mangroves should be migrating, no? But at the least, provide some safeguard. Define naman na sa science ilang meters o hundreds of meters ang kailangan natin to protect our citizens. Why don't we do that?
Can I add to that? Kasi yung case study number 3 na inano ko yung sa Leganes, no? Actually, yung abandoned pond, this is one more reason na abandoned pond should be reverted. Many abandoned ponds are abandoned kasi nasira na ang dike. Ang lakas ng hampas ng waves, no? At saka yung sea level rise. Dati, yung fish pond operators, they really have a budget, yearly budget for repair and dike repair, kung ano-ano pa. Pero lumalaki. With climate change, mas malaki, they cannot afford it na. So they just let it be, naging abandoned. And then the mangroves regenerate. Sana institutionally, ma-facilitate ang reversion na nitong abandoned ponds to mangroves kasi yun yung escape route ng mangroves going up with sea level rise. So ang daming reasons really for abandoned ponds. Right now kasi it's the question facing the government is yung abandoned ponds i-revert ba to mangroves or i-rehabilitate as fish ponds. There's a strong argument i-rehabilitate as fish ponds. Pero if I compile all the reasons kung bakit ibalik na sa mangroves, including itong sa sea level rise, including yung carbon capture na mataas ang rates, mas mabigat talaga to bring back those abandoned ponds to mangroves.
Okay. So yung abandoned fish ponds po talaga natin ay isang napakalaking issue. Ano po? Okay, meron po tayong gusto ata magtanong from our participants. Can we call Miss Myra? Ma'am Myra? Ka-upgrade na po ata, so you could speak. Meron po si Miss Myra. Okay, let's wait po sa kanya. So, meron pa po tayo ditong question. Is it scientifically acceptable to plant different species of mangroves in a certain area?
I think that will depend on where you are now. We just have to follow the species zonation. Regardless of where you are, there are defined species that can really grow in any given site. Hindi pwedeng hulaan.
Okay. Ma'am Jurgenne?
This is mangrove species diversity. Kaya yung sa replanting, no, many times I come across na dapat may diversity dun sa seafront planting. Ang response ko dun, tama yung sabi ni Seth. Doon sa that's a very very challenging environment. Yung seafront, challenging yan. 20 typhoons a year at kung ano-ano pa. So yung diyan, yung colonizers Abyssinia, Soneratia, yan, especially Soneratia, when we did our survey sa Visayas, grabe ang Soneratia. Even compared to Abyssinia, mas mag-aano siya. So in terms of challenging extreme environments, you will not expect diversity. You'll expect yung matira ang matibay, yun, like your Abyssinia and your Soneratia. Pero higher up, especially yung nandyan na sa loob, mga tidal rivers, may mga fresh water dyan na mag-bloom, yung mga Xylocarpus and all these other genera and species. No? So tama yun. You look at the place kung nasaan, and that's how you will be guided as the species.
Okay, may magtatanong pa po ba from our live participant, from our participants? Wala na po. All right. As much as we wanted to entertain all the comments from our participants, it is very unfortunate that we need to finish our lively discussion as we are constrained by time, especially that this would be the last of the series of FDC's policy ETalks on turning the tide, why mangroves matter. Last year, we have covered different topics on watershed. And hopefully next year, we could still provide you with another interesting topics. That is why we are soliciting suggestions from our participants through our evaluation. Before I turn the floor back to our MC, let us hear some inspiring words from our speakers, Doc Jurgenne and Doc Sev.
I think sinabi ko na lahat ng sasabihin ko. If not, nandun naman sa manuals namin, nandun we teach in our training courses. And by the way, I forgot to mention, may webinars din kami on mangroves. May 5 sila in a series, nasa YouTube. So if you're interested to listen, tamad kayong magbasa, pwede rin yung video. You can just email me. But ang parting words ko, kasi narinig ko yung sabi mo na in the future, we'll have, kasi forestry kayo, no? I'm into beech forest and lowland forest. And ang laki ng potential ng beech forest, not only for coastal protection, but also for lowland rehabilitation, para mapalitan yung all those mahogany. But that's a completely different topic, but I can also, you can invite me for that. Kasi the last 10 years, puro na ako beech forest and lowland forest. Yeah.
Okay, Doc Sev.
Yung nga, in the last 20 years lang ako, ma'am. In the last 20 years that I've been into this advocacy on mangrove restoration ecology. But I can also see, and still seeing, yung mga pinaghirapan ng 20 years, biglang mako-convert into something else. So, now I'm close to that age, close to 50. I'm venturing into data science then. And that's the reason if there are students here, maybe we can help the government pool our resources, come up with an open access database. We practice citizen science. It's an honest to goodness platform, very objective. Hopefully we can help build the country back to its actual footing that we intend to be. And sana pagtulong-tulungan natin yung nawala na yung 2 years and counting from the intended roadmap. Madaming na-miss, madaming i-recalibrate. Hopefully by 2030 magkakasama tayong lahat ulit and we assess as one country ano ba nagawa natin. No? That's more of a challenge, Judith.
Okay, sir. Yes, sana until beyond 2030, sir. Again, thank you to our dear speakers, Doc Seb and Doc Jurgenne, and to our participants. It was indeed a very fruitful morning. So now, I turn you back to our MC, Raymand. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Auntie Judith, I implore you to remain. Yes, we'll be proceeding to the next part of the program, which is the awarding of certificates for our speakers. And then, of course, the photo op immediately after. So I invite Forester Judith, Dr. Dixon Gevaña, and Drs. Salmo and Primavera to open their cameras. And then I'll be reading the certificate of appreciation for them. So the certificate of appreciation is awarded to Jurgenne H. Primavera for serving as a speaker on the topic Issues and Challenges in Mangrove Restoration and Conservation in the Philippines during the Forest Policy ETalks 2022 FDC webinar series on Turning the Tide Why Mangroves Matter, 4th webinar, Science-Based Mangrove Management, with the support from the Information Technology Center, UPLB, via Zoom webinar, given this 23rd day of September 2022. Signed, Leonida A. Bugayo, Officer in Charge, Forestry Development Center. And then for the certificate of our next speaker, Certificate of Appreciation is awarded to Severino G. Salmo III, for serving as speaker on the topic, the draft Philippine Mangrove Roadmap 2020-2030, implications on mangrove conservation and restoration during the Forest Policy ETalks 2022 FDC webinar series on Turning the Tide, Why Mangroves Matter, 4th webinar, Science-Based Mangrove Management, with support from the Information Technology Center, UPLB, via Zoom webinar. Given this 23rd day of September 2022, signed Leonida A. Bugayong, Officer in Charge, Forestry Development Center. So a round of applause for our resource speakers. Thank you very much, Dr. Salmo and Dr. Primavera.
Thank you.
So kindly open your cameras for the photo opportunity. Web team ready? So smile lang po tayo sa camera natin. 1, 2, 3, and okay, I think it's taken already. So thank you very much. So moving on, now to formally end this activity and to give his closing remarks, I would like to call on our very youthful, dashing, and energetic, and of course, newly minted director, Dr. Dixon Gevaña.
Yeah.
Thanks, Raymand.
Thanks, Raymand. And good noon to everyone. In behalf of our Policy Center, the FDC, and also our college, the College of Forestry and Natural Resources, we wish to thank you all for being part of this Turning the Tide webinar series and why mangrove matters. So why mangrove matters? This question was sufficiently and succinctly answered by all our speakers in this series. I would like to say that today's webinar on science-based mangrove management has successfully completed and sealed all the needed policy statements that we need to strongly push the policies and pending bills in the Congress. Actually, about 8 of them already, and 1 on sustainable forest management. And we have to focus all our efforts on mangrove conservation and coastal greenbelt establishment. And also the finalization and adoption of the Philippine Mangrove Roadmap. So we are indeed in very challenging times. We all need these policies and roadmap. We have climate change with sea level rise, storm surge, just to name a few. And this require our timely and serious response. So we are very thankful to our speakers today, good friends, Dr. Jurgenne Primavera and Dr. Severino Salmo, for the excellent sharing. I can't help but notice and appreciate how they have delivered their talk with great sincerity and passion. Mangrove restoration and conservation is the way forward, but do it the right and scientific way. As you may have gleaned from our 4 sessions under this webinar series, mangrove is indeed not easy. It has a lot of big challenges, technically, politically, socioculturally oftentimes. And I am very thankful to our dedicated mangrove scientists who shared their expertise in enlightening us on how we can best overcome these challenges. So personally, I am very thankful for their commitment and passion. They continue to inspire many of us to move forward progressively on this cause. So let me also thank our esteemed speakers from the previous webinars. Dr. Alan Castillo from ERDB, Dr. Ariel Blanco from UP Diliman and Philippine Space Agency, our very own Dr. Len Bugayong, Assistant Secretary Marshall Amaro of DNR, Forester Armida Andres of Biodiversity Management Bureau, Ms. Marian Concepcion Gonzalez of BFAR. Same gratitude goes to our mangrove champions who shared their success stories on the ground. Honorable Mayor Alfredo Coro of Del Carmen, Siargao. Ms. Amor Lagadia of LGU Prieto Diaz. Menro Wilson Batislaon of Leganes, Iloilo. And of course, PO President Kadodoy Balyon of Kabasalan, Sibugay, Sambuanga, Sibugay. They have emphasized that for real sustainable management, mangrove management to happen, it must be people-centered, ecologically sound, equitable, economically beneficial, particularly in favor of the poor. And of course, science-based, clearly communicated to all. Let me also acknowledge our CSOs and non-government organization champions on mangrove. They are also prime movers in blue carbon in the country today. Like, for example, the Conservation International Philippines, Worldwide Fund for Nature, or WWF, Zoological Society of London, Oceana, not to name a few. And also a special mention goes to Dr. Miguel Fortes for also leading the Blue Carbon Roadmap workshops. Now, finally, thanks a lot to our very committed and passionate staff here in FDC. The success of this webinar series was made possible by your fresh and bright ideas, and most importantly, faith. Faith that sustainable, science-based mangrove conservation can be achieved. And also faith that more than ever, we need to push this cause now. Surely our work doesn't end here. We shall capitalize on the key recommendations and strategies that we have gleaned from our excellent speakers. We need to package them to visible policy statements to ensure that mangroves will have its big share and place in the country's priority ecosystems for conservation. So again, thanks for being all here and wishing you all a blessed day.
Thank you, Dr. Gevaña, for those very encouraging words. So before I give you the link for the evaluation link for this webinar, let's go to some announcements first. So there will be a 2022 SFFI National Conference in Cebu City, Philippines on November 17 to 19, 2022. So all foresters are invited to this conference. And then next announcement, there will be a CFRNA technical forum with the theme pagpapasigla ng sektor ng paggugubat sa kasalukuyang pandemya, State of the Philippine Forest. So speakers for this technical forum are Forester Tirso P. Parian, Jr., CESO 4, the Director, Forest Management Bureau, Department of Environment and Natural Resources. Discussants will be coming from the LJU, PO Federation, and tree plantation sectors. So this will be on October 7, 2022, 9:30 a.m. to 12 noon at the Nicolas Lansigan Hall, CFNR Auditorium. So for more details, kindly check the Facebook page of UPLB Forestry Development Center and the UPLB College of Forestry Facebook page. Again, if you have not yet followed us, we are on Facebook and YouTube. So we have a YouTube channel on named UPLB Forestry Development Center, and then the official Facebook page of FDC is the UPLB Forestry Development Center. So we really appreciate it if you can follow us so that you can be updated with the future webinars that we will be doing. So now this is the post-evaluation form. So you can scan the link or go to the scan the QR code or go to the link to answer our post-evaluation form. So kindly accomplish on or before the 30th of September 2022 until 12 noon. So by 12 noon, we'll be closing that Google link. So after you have answered the evaluation form, your certificate of attendance will be forwarded to you, or your e-certificate. And so with that, I will be, it's a wrap. And we hope you can join us in our future webinar series. Again, in behalf of all the FDC staff, we would like to thank Dr. Severino Salmo and Dr. Jurgenne Primavera for having served as resource speakers for today and really informing us of the various matters on mangroves. So until next time, thank you everyone and stay safe. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks a lot, Ma'am Jurgenne. Seb,
Thanks for the invitation.
Yes
Until
po.
we
To our
meet
next
again
collab.
sa Mangroves. Kung